Good morning or good afternoon, everybody. Dr. Vasquez here, coming to you live. Actually rained into our hotel right now, so I'm going to use this time to complete my review of this new article published out of Harvard Medical School. Can you imagine that, Harvard Medical School? I mean, this has to be like the best research article ever published if it came out of Harvard Medical School with all these affiliations and all these professionals. I mean, these are high-level professionals, right? These are all MDs and what is it, the other? DRPH, Doctor of Public Health is one of them. And PhDs. I mean, all these people have studied medicine and statistics their whole lives. So this has to be like a perfect research article, right? Maybe so. So all of what I just said is consistent with something called the genetic fallacy or the origin fallacy. So if you believe something just because it was published by Harvard Medical School, or if it was published in a scientific journal, or if it was published, under all these different institutions. I mean, look at all these different institutions that participated in this publication. Harvard Medical School, Harvard School of Public Health, Smith College Program in Statistical and Data Sciences, Fenway Institute, Beth Israel Medical Center and Harvard Medical School, Department of Biostatistics. I mean, my goodness, this thing has been analyzed inside and out. University of Massachusetts. I mean, come on, you can't reasonably argue with the entire University of Massachusetts, much less the Department of Epidemiology at the Harvard Chan School of Public Health at Harvard University. I mean, come on, who are you? Who are you to argue with Harvard School of Medicine? Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, Department of Medicine, McGill University. I mean, come on, this is endorsed by all these international level schools. I mean, who would you be to question such a document? Karolinska, whatever it is, it's famous. This institute in Sweden, I mean, come on, Department of Global Public Health. I mean, these people must know everything. They not only know public health, but they know global public health. What else? Another school in Sweden, Department of Life Sciences, University of Technology. I mean, come on. What's better than a University of Technology? Department of Internal Medicine, Mongolian Medicine, International School of Mongolian Medicine in Mongolia. Huh. This thing must be perfect. This thing must be the epitome of science. It was just published. I mean, all of the accumulation of human knowledge is within this document. This was published in March of 2026. I mean, this has to be like the highest possible level of science. Gonna scoot that over just a little bit. So, like I said yesterday in my quick, spontaneous outdoor review or introduction, I should say, before it started raining. This is a very important article. We're talking about a very important treatment target, which is pandemic infectious diseases. I mean, this could hardly be more important. So it's a very important treatment target. We're talking about a very important intervention directly. We're talking about vitamin D, which I believe controls about 3% of the human genome. So it's very important. I've written articles on vitamin D now for the past 22 years. Like I've said before, I am the original gangster of vitamin D. OG, original gangster. Original gangster. Because I wrote The Paradigm Shift back in 2004. So the original gangsters, if I may say so, the original gangsters of vitamin D were Reinhold Weiss, who completely inverted everything we knew about vitamin D in his publication in 1999. In American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. So Reinhold Weiss is obviously a vitamin D gangster. Let's see who else. Another guy published an article in 2003. I'm not remembering his name right now. But he said, his article was actually titled as a question. He said, "Are we ignoring the evidence?" So he wrote that in 2003. And I basically responded in 2004 with saying, yeah, we're ignoring the evidence and this deserves a paradigm shift. Let's see. Robert Heaney, the now late Robert Heaney, was absolutely a gangster of vitamin D. So he published a lot of primary research, and without his research, we would not have been able to advance the paradigm. So, those are some of the historical features, and obviously some others who sometimes did good work and sometimes didn't. One of them was a notorious MD, PhD who published a lot of articles on vitamin D, and then he would conclude by saying, "Oh, well, people need to take 1,000 international units per day," which is completely absurd. So, he did a lot of academic documentation, but then his clinical application was completely absurd. Anyway, going back to this, vitamin D is a very important intervention directly. It's also very important indirectly because vitamin D solves a lot of problems like depression, anxiety, chronic pain, certain autoimmune diseases, even certain types of cancer have been shown. Well, many different types of cancer have been shown to respond at least partially to vitamin D. So if you were to look at vitamin D as a therapeutic by itself, it has a lot of importance. If you look at it in the competitive market of therapeutics, then it also has importance because it's competing with pain drugs, depression drugs, mental health drugs, anti-inflammatory drugs, anti-allergy drugs. So that explains why the medical profession, and of course the holier than thou holy grail of vaccines. So which you can't even talk about. I mean, no one can even question the topic of vaccines without being called like a quack or a medical heretic, or you don't know science or whatever. I mean, anybody who even questions the vaccine paradigm is, at some, vulnerability or liability of being censored or lose their jobs or lose their license. So again, for the third time at least, vitamin D is a very important intervention, but like I said, in the marketplace of medicine, it also competes with some multi-billion-dollar drugs. And I think that explains why the medical profession as a whole is always trying to misunderstand vitamin D. If they can continue to confuse the topic and continue to misunderstand it, then they can continue pushing their drugs and therapeutics and, bastardized protocols that do more harm than good. Including, for example, one of the most black and white examples is a drug that was never approved for anything, and then all of a sudden was approved for the treatment of COVID. And I've reviewed this previously. It's a drug called molnupiravir. Was never approved for anything, and then all of a sudden found a home in this pandemic response. So how could it have gone from being rejected to now it goes from being rejected to standard of care used in all the protocols like overnight? Well, it was based on bullshit research. The research was so bad that the drug companies, first of all, never published it in a scientific journal. They didn't even disclose the complete data set. They didn't show the adverse effects. They didn't show all of the data. And yet the government in the United States approved it. And therefore, after the US approved it, then other countries also approved it. And it became standard protocol, even though the approval, so-called approval of the drug, was based on failure to disclose the evidence of efficacy and danger. And when I did a side-by-side comparison of molnupiravir against vitamin D, vitamin D was like, 100 times cheaper, I believe. Yeah, because molnupiravir costs $700 a dose, and vitamin D maybe cost $7 a dose. And vitamin D was far more effective. And so, here we are, 7 years into the pandemic response, they're still pushing this bullshit narrative, and they're continuing to deny the efficacy of vitamin D. I'm going to stop for a moment and just turn off my internet so we don't get any messages. So again, my list here, number one, very important treatment target, very important intervention, major implications for international government, healthcare, travel policies. Because like I have said previously, and as everyone, of course, knows by now, if they can create the illusion that no alternative exists other than these drugs and vaccines, then they can mandate that, but they can only mandate that for work and travel and, civil liberties. They can only say that that's mandatory if everything else fails. So they have to keep creating this artificial failure of other treatments in order to justify the medical hegemony model. So that's why I say this has major implications for public policy, healthcare, travel policies. Important to review this topic to see if it represents appropriate use of public funds of tens up to hundreds of millions of dollars. So I'm reasonably guessing that the totality of this research for sure cost tens of millions of American dollars, because this was at least partially funded by the NIH, which is the National Institute of Health in the United States. And I've reviewed the work of this particular author before, Joanne E. Manson. She is a DRPH, as I recall. So it's kind of like a PhD in public health, Doctor of Public Health. And I have reviewed her work now several times, and I find her work to be utterly stupid every time she publishes anything. It's the dumbest level of work I can possibly imagine reading. And she's published very broadly. So she's obviously very well connected. I've never read or heard in her videos. I've never seen or heard her say anything of any level of intelligence on the topic of vitamin D. And yet she gets tens of millions of dollars to publish medical propaganda against vitamin D. So, on the one hand, she's a world famous vitamin D researcher. But on the other hand, if you actually look at her work, it's all anti-vitamin D. So she publishes on the topic of vitamin D, but her conclusions are always that vitamin D doesn't work. Or they try to structure the studies in such a way that they cannot possibly find an optimal outcome. Now, they might find a little bit of benefit, but it's almost by accident. It's almost like they did everything possible to try to minimize the benefit, and then they couldn't help but find some benefit, and then they had to publish it. And then they say, oh, well, yeah, reduce the incidence of cancer and autoimmune disease by X amount. That was one of their findings, even though it's purely by accident. They habitually underdose and they kind of underschedule, we might say. The dose is too low, the duration is too short, and so they usually don't find what I would consider to be optimal benefit because they don't want to find optimal benefit. So, those are two of the most common strategies in medical research that's trying to discredit nutritional intervention is they use a low dose, or they use a highly toxic dose, or they use bolus dosing in the case of vitamin D, which is both toxic and ineffective for reasons that I've discussed previously. Sorry, I'm getting a message I have to respond to. So I'm okay. But like I have said before, I always try to keep these videos as short as possible, but sometimes I just keep going. That's because the whole conversation is details, and the details matter. So again, the way to sabotage nutrition research is too low of a dose, too high of a dose, too short of a duration, and lack of cofactors. So most nutrients work together with other nutrients, like vitamin D works with selenium and works with magnesium especially, and works with vitamin K2. So, when they address a vitamin deficiency like vitamin D, but they fail to address the 70% of people who have magnesium deficiency, I believe 30% of people who have zinc deficiency, and the 15% with selenium deficiency, then you can see that a monotherapeutic intervention is almost designed to fail simply by its design. So that's an example of using the drug paradigm to do nutrition research. Most drugs, of course, work singly. They work by themselves. In contrast, most nutrients work in tandem with other nutrients. So I'll try to keep making progress here. But again, Joanne E. Manson has received, I am guessing, but I'm guessing quite reasonably, tens of millions of dollars, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, for her research on vitamin D, and all of her work is just, in my opinion, pathetic. So in the process of reviewing her work, including this one, which may have just been a side project for her, she's obviously the last author, we are still, within the scope of conversation to discuss the appropriate or inappropriate use of public funds. This has very important implications for insurance reimbursement and determining which professions get funding or insurance payments. So, for example, if they can continue to denigrate the importance of nutrition while always inflating the benefit of drugs, then that slants political policy and financial policy in favor of the medical profession. So in other words, they have to keep the medical profession kind of brainwashed and controlled in order for them to fulfill their job of selling drugs. And if they do that sufficiently, then they get priority. They get better insurance reimbursement, et cetera, because the system doesn't want that insurance reimbursement going to nutritionists. Sorry, I'm a little dehydrated right now, and I don't have any water at all. So in order to slant financial power and therefore political power in favor of people who sell drugs, they have to publish, again, low-level research like this, because you sure as hell don't want the nutritionists having a say in things and getting reimbursement. And you certainly wouldn't want chiropractors over here using nutrition to, provide more benefits. So I've already looked at the research on the clinical interventions using adequately dosed vitamin D against this pandemic infection. And the studies that were done correctly showed massive benefit, like 80% cure and 80% life-saving benefit of appropriately dosed vitamin D in the treatment of this condition. Whereas the other studies that maybe used the wrong dose or a low dose or a toxic dose or a bolus dose, they didn't show any benefit whatsoever, and you wouldn't expect them to show benefit. So again, if you've got nutritionists and chiropractors over here using nutrients, and it's actually better than the drugs and the vaccines, that would invert the entire insurance reimbursement schedule and therefore give more money to people who are not so completely aligned with the drug paradigm. And also, as I said here, point number 6, if they can continue to say that nutrition is ineffective and that the only salvation is vaccines and drugs, then they can also supposedly justify censoring anyone who talks about nutrition. Like, I've been deplatformed off of every platform, and the few platforms I am on, I'm shadow banned. So my emails don't arrive. They make it difficult for me to upload my videos on a certain platform that has my name. And then on another platform, within the same platform actually, that doesn't have my name on it, I can upload my videos much faster. But part of being shadow banned is reduced functionality of the website and also reduced distribution of my information. So, I appear on the platform, but they make it complicated. And an example of that is Facebook. I had to totally give up on Facebook. I'm banned, I'm blocked, I can barely say anything on there. And every time I want to get into Facebook in the account that I've had now for 20 years, which I don't even care about anymore, I don't even pay attention to it. But I have had that same account now for 20 years or so. And every time I want to use it, I have to log in again. I have to confirm in a different program my password. So, I'm shadow banned to the point of just being completely blocked. So anyway, all of that is part of appreciating the impact of bullshit research like this. All the way from science to integrity to public funding to insurance reimbursement to censorship and disemployment, because some people lost their jobs simply for talking about nutrition. So my personal title of this review is Harvard Bullshit, because this is bullshit. This is bullshit research. I hope you've looked at it by now. I sent it out yesterday so that you would have a chance to look at it. So I'm stating, black and white, rocks are hard, water is wet, and this is bullshit research. Let me just look for one little note real quick. Nothing. So I'll read, if you want to read the abstract without my commentary, you can certainly pause the video and do that. I'm going to read the abstract. It's the only thing that's available right now. They haven't made the complete article available yet because it's still in press, as you can see here. So they've reviewed it, they've accepted it, they've peer reviewed it, everyone's happy with it. They're doing the typesetting and the formatting. So they are going to publish this. It's in press, but apparently it hasn't been released yet. And I'm not going to pay money just to get a draft of the article. I would never pay for this article. But let's look at the abstract. So I'm just telling you now, my notes are on the same document here. And I'll post these today when I post this video. And let's see. So I've talked again about the importance here. It looks like I talked about that twice. So here's the importance of it. Here's the importance again. So the only other thing that I see here that I haven't already mentioned, well, I guess I did already mention it. I mean, again, a lot of these people get funding from the U.S. government. So, excuse me, the government, the United States government, obviously colludes with the drug companies. I mean, the American government is basically an extension of the marketing department of the drug companies. So I'm assuming that I've already covered all this. So I'll get into these 13 points right here. And hopefully I haven't, correlated my notes here, but I assume it's all going to work out just fine. Data from randomized controlled trials of vitamin D3 supplementation in modifying the course of severe acute respiratory infections, respiratory syndrome, coronavirus 2, are sparse. First of all, that's false. So part of doing correct research is, I'm just going to respond to a message real quick. Part of doing competent research is doing what's called a competent literature review. So they have failed in their first line here. This is already a failure. They have failed to conduct an adequate literature review because they don't want to see the data. So this is already false. If I were grading this document as if I were teaching nutrition at the graduate level, which I have done several times, if I were teaching a nutrition course and a student turned in this paper, I would fail them on this assignment. So this is wrong. This means you didn't do your homework. This is wrong. We evaluated the effect of vitamin D3 supplementation on healthcare utilization and other clinical outcomes among adults with COVID and their close contacts. So if you know how to read research, like I've told you before, you're going to see that things are starting to get squirrely. So look at who they are contrasting here. If you're a doctor, then you definitely need to be at this level of analysis, And it's a bit subtle here, but it gets more clear in the following paragraph. But look at what they state here. Adults with COVID-19 is one of the groups, and the other group is their close contacts. Well, that's not a legit double-blind placebo-controlled randomized study. You're comparing a sick group. Pay attention to what I say if you haven't already figured it out. It'll get clear when I say it, of course. It's not really clear here, but it gets really clear. Watch what they state, look at what they state, and then watch how I describe it. And you're going to see how absurd this is. They are comparing sick people with healthy people. This isn't even a appropriate comparison. It's completely absurd. So we're only 2 sentences into this article, and it's a complete failure here and a complete failure here. It's absurd. We conducted a parallel 2-group randomized controlled double-blinded trial targeting free-living adults in the United States and Mongolia. Index participants with newly diagnosed COVID were cluster randomized with up to 1. I'm just going to pause for a minute because that's stupid. Up to 1? Well, it's either 1 or it's less than 1, and if it's less than, you can't have less than 1 human in a group. So, how do you have less than 1? These have to be, somewhat similarly sized groups with similar characteristics. If you look at any legitimate research article, they will always do a baseline comparison of the major characteristics of those 2 groups. These people were sick with COVID. These people were sick with COVID. They were very similar in their characteristics. If they were randomized appropriately, these people got the intervention. These people didn't. That's what a legit study looks like. This is not a legit study in any way, shape, or form, as the cliche goes. They're comparing sick people with COVID to healthy people who don't have COVID, and then they're looking for a difference in the group. That's impossible. Index participants with newly diagnosed COVID were cluster randomized with up to 1 of their cohabiting contacts. That doesn't make any sense. You can't compare the outcomes in a double-blind randomized placebo-controlled trial. You can't compare outcomes of an intervention in two groups that are totally different. You got sick people here and you got healthy people here. This makes no sense. Either to an oral vitamin D, D3, loading dose of 9,600 international units for 2 days, followed by 3,200 international units for 4 weeks, or placebo. Okay, so again, if you're at the doctorate level of healthcare, you need to read that, and you should have a sympathetic response to that. You should have a visceral response to how completely stupid that is. 9,600 international units for acutely ill people is not a loading dose. A loading dose in this context would be 50,000 units, 60,000 units, 70,000 units, no more than 70,000 units, but let's say 60,000. That would be based, my dosage there of 60,000 units of vitamin D3 is based on a study that was published back in 2021, I believe, maybe 2020, but I think 2021, in one of the journals published by the British Medical Journal. So this is not some hidden publication. That was a major publication. And what they showed in that study was using about 60,000 international units was the appropriate dose. Again, that's what I just said is evidence of their failure to perform a competent literature review. This should be 70,000 or 60,000, not 9,600. So, and for only 2 days is even more stupid. So this is they're calling it a loading dose because they're trying to take advantage of the people who don't know the topic. In order to analyze research, you can't simply read it without having background in it. Like I've got background in this topic because I've been publishing on this topic for 20 years, 22 years or more, 26 years. So this dose is inadequate. The duration of their so-called loading dose is inadequate. And 3,200 international units for acutely ill people who are deficient has no scientific basis whatsoever. In the article that I published back in 2004, we said the minimum dose for an adult should be 4,000 international units. And that was 20 years ago, 22 years ago. So the loading dose is a lie. The form of D3 is appropriate only at a higher dose. The other alternative that they had here was to use 25-hydroxyvitamin-D, which is the storage form, and the more biologically active form, as I have reviewed previously. But none of this is correct. This is not an appropriate study design. They don't have an appropriate comparison group, and their intervention is too low for too short of time because they only did this for 4 weeks. So vitamin D3 doesn't enter the body and immediately start to work. It has to get converted into 25-hydroxyvitamin D3, which, as I already said, is the active form and the storage form. That process could take at least a week. As I said back in 2004 in the vitamin D paradigm shift, the clinical trial, the timing, I should say, of the clinical trial requires optimization of vitamin D levels, and then you measure outcomes after that. In this case, I guarantee you they will have not optimized vitamin D status based on this protocol, and they sure as hell wouldn't have done it immediately, let alone to measure beneficial outcomes within a 4-week period of time. So this is totally wrong. It's too low of a dose. Their loading dose is inadequate. Their daily dose is inadequate, and the timing is horrible. I mean, 4 weeks is just stupid for this dosage. If they had used a higher dosage or a different form, again, specifically the 25-hydroxyvitamin-D, if they had used that, then they could start looking at some results. But this is wrong. Participants completed weekly questionnaires on healthcare utilization, disease severity, and long COVID index, or new SARS-CoV-2 infection. They should be consistent in their use of abbreviations and language, but it's okay. Well, let me tell you something that's obvious. They can't look legitimately for long COVID with only 4 weeks. I mean, come on. Most people who are acutely ill with a viral infection need a few weeks to recover, a lot of them. If they're not taking nutritional supplements, the recovery process from an acute viral illness can take weeks. And so here they are looking for long COVID within 4 weeks or 8 weeks. I mean, this is stupid. You can't look for a long-term outcome with short-term surveillance. I'm going to say that again. You cannot legitimately look for a long-term outcome with an intervention of only 4 weeks, and then additional follow-up, I think, was another 4 weeks. So this is just stupid. I mean, everything about this, every line in this publication is stupid. Index participants, 1,700 of them, were 38 years old, mostly female, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. 45% of them were vitamin D deficient or insufficient, with a 25 hydroxy vitamin D level below 20 nanograms per milliliter. They're completely deficient. So they are completely deficient. They're highly vulnerable to complications and severe infection, and no way in hell were they normalized by the intervention described here. So what we've established, looking at the intervention and their baseline status, is that this intervention had no chance whatsoever of optimizing their vitamin D status. So this was completely designed to fail, Baseline characteristics were similar. No, they weren't similar. Baseline characteristics were that you had a group of people with COVID and you had a group of people who were healthy. That's not similar. That's absurd that they would even say that. By the way, you've got my other notes here. I'm going to post these notes even if I don't read all of them right now. That's just stupid. Baseline characteristics. Oh yeah, well you've got people over here with COVID and you've got people over here who don't have COVID. You can't say their baseline is similar. The 4-week index did not significantly differ. Yeah, because your treatment sucked. All this is just bullshit. So this is what I would call, more specifically, this is scientific bullshit. This is not just bullshit, but this is scientific bullshit. Scientific bullshit, as I define it, is the use of a bunch of numbers and descriptions and indices and odds ratios and confidence intervals and all this scientific and statistical and mathematical language to make bullshit look like it's scientific. If the intervention itself is unscientific, then all of this numerical gymnastics is also bullshit. Similar non-significant results were observed for the specified secondary treatment and prevention outcomes. I mean, this whole thing is just horrible. One of the things that they looked for, let's look at their primary and secondary outcomes. Like one of their outcome measures, which I saw somewhere in here, one of their outcome measures was equal to or greater than 1. Well, I mean, come on. It was for new visits to a healthcare provider. So, I mean, obviously people who are acutely ill are more likely to go to see a healthcare provider than people who aren't acutely ill. That doesn't necessarily mean that the treatment was either working or not working. But if you have two groups that are not, you've got a sick group and a healthy group, and then you say, well, we're going to define the effectiveness of treatment based on who goes to see their doctor. Obviously, the sick people are going to go see their doctor. You're not comparing similar groups. I mean, this whole thing is just so completely absurd. I mean, this should never have been written, let alone published. But it was. And it was endorsed by all these organizations. And this person in particular received tens of millions of dollars, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, for her work. So-called work, and it's just propaganda in vitamin D. Non-significant trend of benefit for vitamin D. Well, that's exactly what you would expect. So the timing was inadequate, the treatment was inadequate, but it was still better than nothing. You would expect a little bit of benefit, and that's what they showed. But then they cut off the interventions because they didn't want to see more benefit. They said, well, they basically asked themselves, what's the dumbest study we can do and still have it get published? And you're looking at it. It could not have been worse. So they treated the people only for 4 weeks, as you can see here, but they followed them for 8 weeks. And the reason they did that is because the little bit of benefit they would have received in their vitamin D status would start to disappear by this much time. So they were deficient. They were severely deficient at the start. They may have gotten slightly better, of course, with supplementation, but then you would expect them to revert back to baseline. And they maintained the follow-up because they wanted to see these people revert to baseline and therefore show no benefit. And that's exactly what they did. So that's it. Among adults with newly diagnosed SARS-CoV-2 infections, vitamin D supplementation did not significantly change the 4-week incidence of healthcare utilization or COVID-19 related outcomes compared with placebo. So yeah. Let me just see if I need to make any note here. I'll run through these real quick. Insufficient loading dose, insufficient daily dose. 4 weeks is just stupid. Prolonged surveillance with inadequate treatment duration is a setup for failure, and that's exactly what they did, and that's what they found. High baseline prevalence of severe deficiency means that this had no chance of working. Let me try to give you another analogy if I can. Before I started this video, I had a cappuccino. I had 2 coffees, and then I had a cappuccino and a double espresso, so my mouth is really dry right now, and I don't have anything to drink, so that's why I'm trying to get through this. But I got a really dry mouth right now. So, where was I here? I was going to give you an example. So I already said that they were very deficient. Watch this analogy. This is a good analogy. The people here were very deficient, and then they got an inadequate treatment, and then, of course, it didn't work. This would be the same as working in a hospital with people who are hemorrhaging from gunshot wounds or internal bleeding or whatever, and they're going into shock, and then you give them a glass of water and say, I hope your shock gets better. Now your volume repleted. So they took people, by analogy, they took people who were going into hypovolemic shock, and then they gave them a glass of juice or something, and they said, I hope your volume gets repleted based on this. Of course, it's not going to work. And that's exactly what they did here. The baseline status of these patients was completely deficient. They gave them a little bit of supplementation. It didn't work. Of course, it's a failure, and then they published it. Comparison group was not sick at baseline. You cannot do, the fact that this even got approved for funding is absurd. But that's exactly my point. You're looking at multiple levels of corruption here. You're looking at multiple levels of intellectual failure. You're looking at multiple failures in checks and balances that somebody should have said, my God, this is absurd. No, nobody said that. They all went along with it. You cannot do a clinical trial comparing healthy people with acutely ill people and then say that you can't, no comparison can be done with that. Like I said before, they tried to find long COVID. They tried to find outcomes for long COVID in an intervention of 4 weeks with 8 weeks of follow-up. That's stupid. It's really the wrong form of vitamin D for acute illness unless they're going to use a higher dose. They compared 1,700 sick patients against 270 healthy cohabitants. That's like that. I've never seen a study designed like this. I've never seen a randomized study trying to compare acutely ill people with healthy people. I mean, this is completely stupid. Clear failure, as I said before, of adequate literature review. An obvious intentional failure. This is strategic stupidity. This is a clear failure on behalf of Harvard. But who funds Harvard? Drug companies, governments. Who funds governments? Drug companies. I mean, this whole thing is just stupid. Clear failure of NIH review and misuse of taxpayer dollars, assuming this got some funding from the U.S. government. I know that one of the authors has received millions of dollars from the government. I don't know to what extent this particular article was funded or not, just because they haven't published the entire article, so it's hard to know. But I know that she has received tons of money. And for what? For this level of bullshit. Clear failure of editorial review quality. So that's what I wanted to say about this. That's what I have said now, so I'm going to let this go. I'll post all my notes. But again, this is just bullshit. This is high-level, scientific appearing bullshit from all these institutions that I've already reviewed, from Harvard Medical School, from the NIH, and it's just pure garbage. So I won't repeat myself any more than I already have, but that's my review of this article. It's just totally stupid. Hope you're all doing well. Take care. Bye-bye.